Hello, welcome to another episode of the Transfer News Central podcast. This is the start of the new series of podcasts which we're releasing, promoting the idea of staying at home amid a very treacherous time at the moment. And what better way to celebrate, not celebrate, wrong word, but to have some entertainment to listen to than not obviously myself, Johnny, but we brought Ian along with us. Ian Darke, one of the best commentators of the past 30 years, football, boxing, I believe athletics actually at some point earlier on in your career, Ian. Welcome on board. We're absolutely delighted to have you.
Yeah, nice to speak to you, Johnny, and let's hope everybody's keeping nice and safe and we're back out there in the football world pretty soon.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no better question really to start with, Ian, than just asking simply how you are and how you're coping. I'm sure many people want to know.
Well, thanks for asking, Johnny. Yeah, okay so far, as are all my family as well. Very happily, we've been staying indoors, bar the odd walk through our village, and we're just sitting tight and hoping for the best, like everybody else.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, well, many of your followers saw, as I alluded to before coming on here, a few Ian Darke techers with the football, powerful right foot into the top corner. So I guess I've got to ask you, Ian, are you going to be doing any tricks on the pommel horse in the coming days?
No, I'm not Max Whitlock. I'm no threats to any of them. And that little football video that we put out on Twitter, which got a lot of views, I have to say, so people must be pretty bored. All I can say is I'm still deadly from half a yard out.
Absolutely. No, it was very good to see it. It was very good. Have you tried the toilet roll challenge yet?
No, I haven't got to that one yet. But I was reading a piece about Sadio Mane, that he learned to play football using a grapefruit.
Wow.
In Senegal. So all things are possible. But I know Lionel Messi is quite handy with those toilet rolls, isn't he?
Absolutely.
Better rephrase that, haven't I?
Yeah. I'm sure many of us are very handy with the toilet rolls, Ian. But yeah, we'll move on swiftly, I think, from that. At this moment, actually, there was, on a more serious note, there was the Premier League footballers actually came in for quite a lot of. Well, there was a subtle dig from the government. Matt Hancock thought that it was appropriate to suggest that Premier League footballers ought to be doing more to combat the crisis that we currently are living in. So how pleasing was it for someone like you, who's works very much on the front lines of the footballing game, to see Premier League footballers bounce back emphatically from the sort of put down from the government in the Players Together initiative, in which a large group of players across the Premier League platform have contributed lots of finances towards the NHS and towards particular sectors in the UK that are struggling at the moment.
Very gratifying, really, because I think the footballers were in danger of getting themselves a bad name. But I do think this, despite the fact that they may be young millionaires playing in the Premier League, they are, in the main, working class guys who haven't forgotten their roots and really do want to help. So I think really where the game's been perceived to be dragging its feet is trying to work out exactly how that help can be done. It's great to see the captains have got together and the players are doing their own thing. I think the Professional Footballers Association have been, let's put it this way, a little out of touch in realising that the clubs are actually, even in the Premier League, with all the money in the Premier League, they are in a difficult time, and the players do need to cut their wages to help out a little bit. And it's good to see that some of the clubs are doing that, Southampton, Brighton, and I think others will follow soon.
I mean, there's been so many nice gestures other than that even. Particularly, I remember, I think Carlo Ancelotti, Everton manager, and some of my own club, I'm a Burnley fan, a lot of the Burnley players were calling up fans who were in a particular struggle given the situation. And it was really touching. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of these examples on social media. It's really nice, isn't it, that I suppose, even though, as we've sort of alluded to, there's this idea that footballers maybe are in their own little bubble, that they do come from those working class backgrounds, and that they can still give something back, in this time of need.
Yeah, I think it's important as well that they do. It doesn't take much, and it means so much to ordinary people if they get a phone call from the famous player from their team, and all they've got to do is pick up the phone. And let's be honest about it, like the rest of us at the moment, the players are just hanging around with very little to fill their day other than trying to keep fit. So, yeah, I think it's good. And I hope, in a way, we're all going to be looking at the world in a slightly different way after this. And maybe it's been true that footballers, although they do care, perception means a lot. And I think there is a perception that they are living in a bubble behind big walls and driving fast cars and living a life the rest of us don't recognize. I think this has brought everybody right back down to earth, and maybe made us all realize that the real heroes are maybe not the sports stars and the big celebrities we see on TV. The real heroes are the people who save lives.
Absolutely, well said, and brilliantly put. On a slightly lighter note, because I mean, of course, I feel like I did a podcast quite recently. It was talking very heavily about the and it was quite downbeat. You know, everything that's going on at the moment is quite overwhelming. It's unprecedented times, really. So just to shift the topic a little bit, of course, Ian, apart from doing your footballing techers in the garden, I'm sure you'll have to keep yourself occupied in other ways. So just a few quick fire questions for you. What's your favorite musical artist? Who's your favorite performer?
Well, my tastes are quite eclectic. If you went in, the music I've got on my phone that comes on in my car ranges from everything from songs from the musicals and doo-wop hits from the 1950s right through to the likes of Eminem. So it's hard to categorize what my tastes are. I like a lot of different things. I don't have a kind of closed mind. I suppose if you picked an artist, quite a fan of David Gray.
Very, very good. I mean, Eminem surprises me, and I've got to admit.
Only a couple of tracks. I mean, everybody else, they get in my car and they think, what's this old guy listening to Eminem for?
What do you think of Stormzy, Ian? Are you a big Stormzy fan?
No, I've heard a bit of his stuff, and some of it is quite good. But no, I haven't got any of that in my collection at the moment.
Very, very interesting. Ian Darke likes Eminem. I'm sure that'll be on the front page somewhere. That's an interesting one. What about favorite film, Ian? Favorite film?
Those are hard questions off the top of your head, but I mean, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid came up somewhere the other day, and I watched that. Still a fantastic screenplay, beautifully written, such a clever movie. So I definitely picked that out. And I grew up with a journalistic training, so I love All the President's Men. That's another one,
very good, very good,
isn't it? Yeah,
classics, Ian. Classics.
The expose of Watergate. I mean, in more recent years, Spotlight was good in the same kind of genre. The film about, based on the Boston Globe and exposing the corruption in the Catholic Church.
Anything on Netflix? Anything on Netflix, Ian, that takes your fancy?
I've watched The Sunderland Until I Die thing, and I'm watching every episode of Line of Duty back, because I missed that the first time around. So love that. And yeah, I've been trawling through Netflix and finding some old movies and series. There's a lot to see there. I'm sounding like an advert for Netflix.
Other streaming services are available, like Amazon Prime, of course. Yes. I
worked for Prime Video when they had the Premier League games.
You did. Revolutionizing streaming in many ways, actually, Amazon with the Premier League. I mean, they're the first company, I believe, aren't they, to have made it a streaming service that shows the Premier League.
Well, you don't know which way it's going to go. I think the coverage of the game on television, especially now, and that will have made, I think, people think that every game was available. And I wonder if that's the general direction in which we're heading.
It'll be interesting to see. Another question here, then, quick fire before we go on to your wonderful career. Well, it's kind of related to that. Who's your favourite person within the footballing world who you've met face to face?
Oh. Whatever.
Yes.
I might need time to think of that one, really. But somebody like Steve McManaman would be up there.
Yeah, we'll talk about Steve.
Steve McManaman's a great guy, and we've worked a lot together in recent years. And I don't think anybody who works with him or knows him in our business thinks otherwise than that either. So, I mean, hey, look, that's a big question and over a long time. But yeah, Steve would be up there. Stephen, I should say. He told me once, here's something. He said to me that he was never called Steve by anybody until he started playing football. He was always Stephen.
Wow.
I said, well, why didn't you say to the journalist, call me Stephen? He said, well, I couldn't be bothered.
No, to be honest, whenever I've heard Steve McManaman on any show, he always seems like a really relaxed, laid-back, fun guy, and and it doesn't surprise me. I know you've had a wonderful time together with ESPN. Actually, I think it was initially in America. So we'll touch on that later on. But we'll go a bit further back in. We'll go a bit further back. There's a chronology to this show, even if it looks like my head isn't screwed on. I like to think that somewhere this planning will pay off. So let's go back to Ian Darke, right to the beginning.
Right.
When you were growing up, was there ever an inkling that you thought, you know what, because you talk, you hear some footballers and you say, what did you want to be when you grew up? And they say, I always knew I was going to be a footballer since I was born. It was what I was destined to be. When you were going through high school, Ian, what was your general consensus? Were you unsure? What were you like at school? Broad question. I'm sure you can answer.
Not very good at school academically until I got to the sixth form, when I started to get the hang of it and pass my A levels okay at grammar school. Quite reticent, a little bit shy. But here's something: my friends tell me that I used to commentate on the house football matches at school from the sidelines when I wasn't playing, and I also remember commentating on games I'd play against myself in the back garden, the sort of make-believe Ashes cricket series. So I don't know, maybe something was there, but I'd be lying if I said to you I always knew I was going to be a commentator. What I wanted to be originally was a footballer, wasn't good enough. Then I wanted to be a journalist, which I was for a little while before going into radio.
Well, that's interesting, actually. Me, myself, I'm sure I speak for many people now, really are really enamored with the sports journalism business and really want to get in there. Just before we move on to your later career, is there anything in particular you'd give us as kind of, I know you get this question all the time probably, but what would the general advice be for wannabe people in that field?
If you want to get into broadcasting, I'd say from a very early age, if you can, try to get used to talking in front of a microphone, which some people are very self-conscious about, very nervous about even. But even if you buy an old-fashioned piece of equipment, just get that from somewhere and practice talking into the microphone, talking about football matches or whatever your favorite sport is. And then maybe bit by bit, you will develop your own style and start to relax. And I'd always say to people, just be yourself. Don't try to be anybody else. Be yourself in front of that microphone.
I mean, you say that, Ian, that's a very important thing as well, because you see so many different commentators now have a particular style. You can hear it. You can hear just a few words and you go, that's Martin Tyler. You can hear another few words and that's Peter Drury. That's Ian Darke. You all have I think every commentator has a particular way of doing their job. What would you say your style is now? What's your style for commentary?
Hard to categorize really, because I'm not conscious of actually when I'm broadcasting of I've got to do it in this style. It comes out the way that it comes out, and I guess over the years your style does evolve. But you're quite right. I think every commentary style has its own particular DNA, and I admire so many different styles as well. There's more than one way to crack the egg. It's not an exact science, and I've always said the same thing really, that one man's great commentator is the next one's pain in the backside. It's just the way it is. It's a subjective business, but I do think there are a few hard and fast rules along the way that I think could help any young commentator coming through.
Sure. I mean, so very good advice there, Ian. When we go, you talked about your A levels, and that's no mean feat, by the way. I think anyone who goes down that path and completes their A levels, very well done, because honestly, I've never worked harder academically. So fair play for that, Ian. But so you went to university, I imagine, after that?
No, I didn't go to university because
okay.
I wanted to be a journalist. So I went on a full year journalism course, which at the end of it, they promised you a job on a regional newspaper. So guess what? I ended up going back to the city I was born in, Portsmouth. I support the local team. I think some people know that. And worked on the Portsmouth Evening News. That was my first job in newspapers. And it was there I did my first commentary as well for the local hospital radio channel, commentating alongside the local fire chief initially. Then I started commentating with some injured players on Pompey matches down at Fratton Park. And then at the end of the season, we were told nobody had ever heard the games because there'd been a technical fault. So it really was a very long audition over a whole season. How it took them until the end of the season to find out nobody was hearing it, that's another question. But hey, it was good experience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's fascinating stuff, and it really is. I mean, when you look back now, could you imagine listening to that commentary now and thinking, "Oh, I sounded a bit, I'm not quite as refined as maybe I am now," or even then, did you think, "Oh, I have a good base, for my commentaries"? I imagine you've sort of come on so far, in your career. When you go back to that, because I used to do a little bit of commentary a few years ago, and the first one I did, it was awful, and then as I slowly built myself up, I got better. But I imagine for you, doing commentary for over 30 years, going right back to the beginning, it must be strange if you could hear that now.
Yeah, well, I sometimes cringe on some of the commentaries I do even now, because you're never happy. You've never done the perfect one. So yeah, I have no idea what it sounded like. Probably pretty awful. Probably way too overexcitable, because I was excited about doing a second division match being played at Fratton Park. But it doesn't matter in a way, because when I went to national radio, BBC Radio Sports Room, Broadcasting House and all that, and joined what was really a bit of an academy, they got me commentating on some boxing, because Desmond Lynam, you'll know Desmond Lynam, he'd left, he did the boxing commentary. I must have done 40 test commentaries, none of which were deemed good enough before they let me loose on the airwaves.
Wow.
So yeah, don't be frightened of making mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to call things wrong. Everybody's going to dry up from time to time. Just stick at it, and bit by bit, you'll start to get it right if you're determined enough.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, absolutely. If at first you don't succeed, as they say, try again.
Somebody once said, if at first you don't succeed, maybe failure is your style. But that's true.
I was gonna say, I mean, I've been, that's also a very fair thing to say. But you obviously, so you were doing that quite a bit at the start. You were doing that kind of work, but then you moved into BBC Radio. Now, when you move into BBC Radio, is that something BBC? Do you suddenly think, right, I've got my foot in the door now? This is kind of, at the time, I think it would have been the 80s, wouldn't it, Ian? I believe the 80s for BBC. At the time, that wasn't quite as big as...
Well, I worked for local radio in the 70s at Leicester. Yeah. That's where I first got into the BBC. And I was as nervous as a kitten. I had to read the news on about the second day I was there. I remember one day talking about things going wrong. I fell down the stairs on the way down from the 9th floor to the 8th floor, where you had to read the news. And I read the news with blood gushing from a gash on my forehead, which was obscuring the script. So, that was a bit of a baptism of fire. All kinds of things happened to you along the way. But, working in local radio knocked a few edges off. So I think when I went to national radio, that was a big help. I'd done 5 years of broadcasting by then, and I was, I wouldn't say I was ready, but I was nearly ready to be on national radio.
Absolutely. I mean, but as I was sort of suggesting before that, and you've sort of come up with the answers that I were kind of looking for there. When we say BBC, as we say, that must have given you like, wow. I'm not suggesting the ego's gone through the roof, ridiculously, but it must be a nice feeling to think, in essence, it's like the blue tick on Twitter back then.
Yeah, that's you're right. I was very, very proud to work for the BBC, and yeah, you do have a feeling of wow, this is something quite special. But then another emotion comes in and say, well, I've got to be good enough to do that. But the standards were exacting there, very exacting at times. But it was really good for you because it was a school of hard knocks in many ways, especially working for the BBC Radio Sports Department. If they said they wanted a piece that lasted 1 minute, they meant 1 minute, not 61 seconds, not 59. And if you overran on any piece, you certainly got told about it. Or if they thought that your script was a bit below par, or you might do a report or a piece into the sports desk and they'd say, well, you didn't make that point very well. Why did you use that word? So it was brilliant, really, because I think every broadcaster, doesn't matter who they are, you do need feedback because it does help to improve you.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, certainly. And as you say, the School of Hard Knocks would stand you in good stead anyway. That kind of precision, that kind of accuracy to absolutely get it on point would no doubt be absolutely massive for any career, really, any career path. So then to go from the BBC to Sky Sports, I mean, that's another step in itself, I guess, because Sky then acquired the rights to the Premier League. You became one of a big four, shall we say, one of the big four: Martin Tyler, Rob Hawthorne, Alan Parry, and yourself. How was it going from BBC Radio, where you've done a lot of sport there? As I say, that's an overwhelming feeling of that you've made it, you're going somewhere. Then you're on Sky Sports, massive new thing, Premier League football, one of the top four commentators covering all these big games. I mean, that must have been another sense of wow.
Well, at the beginning, it wasn't four. It was just me and Martin Tyler. And Martin was the main man, as he is still now, for Sky Sports. So he would do like the Super Sunday games, as they called them, and I would do the Monday night matches in the early days of Sky Sports. And I've got to tell you, I was pretty new to television then. I'd just moved from radio to television. I'd done a bit of work at Eurosport, so I was getting the hang of it. But huge pressure on. I remember thinking, at that time, everybody was thinking, well, what is this channel? Who are these new boys who are coming in showing the football now? Why isn't it on BBC? Why isn't it on ITV anymore? I mean, who are they anyway? So they were all waiting. You had the feeling that the whole of the press and other sections of the media were waiting with daggers drawn to rip big holes in our coverage. But they didn't do that. They liked the coverage, and they could see that it was probably a step up with more cameras and maybe more depth to the coverage as well. So they were exciting early days. They were days really where we were breaking new frontiers along the way, and thoroughly enjoyable. And I do remember some of my fondest memories are doing those Monday night matches in the first season of the Premier League. And Sky Sports, of course, well, the rest is history, as they say.
No, absolutely. I mean, you're quite right, actually. It was initially the two commentators. I believe it came into four commentators, the big four, wasn't it? When a few years later, the Sky got the boxing rights, and then they had to sort of expand and bring in, I think that's when Rob Hawthorne took over Monday night.
Yeah, Rob came in the mid-90s. I think Alan Parry came in the mid-90s as well. Of course, Ian Crocker was on the scene, later Bill Leslie, who's still around, of course. And all those guys have made very good careers. Yeah, you're right. I had to do a little bit less of the football for a while because I also do boxing commentary and was covering a lot of big fights.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite an interesting turn. I mean, how you'd done a bit of boxing, hadn't you, before anyway? But to then become the number one Sky Sports commentator for boxing, did you see it as there's two ways of looking at it. Obviously, you're a big football fan. Did you think, oh, it's a shame I'm transitioning now? I like doing the football. I like my Monday night slot. Or did you think, right, I'm the main guy doing boxing. I really like this new opportunity?
Football is my first love, to be honest with you. Boxing was something that I always liked growing up, and I used to listen to the fights on the radio, and I had pretty good knowledge of it, which was why, even though I was a junior reporter at BBC Radio, just going back a bit, that when Desmond Lynam left to go to television and have his stellar career there, I was the only one really around the rest of the office who had too much of a handle on it at the time. So I got sent to cover big fights in Las Vegas for BBC Radio. So I had that bit of background. I got the job because I'd done it in radio. I was getting the fights for Sky Sports when they signed a big deal with Frank Warren, and maybe for the next 20 years, nearly all the big fights were on Sky Sports. A few were on ITV. So Yeah, but football always remained my first love, and for most of the time I was at Sky Sports, I did football and boxing.
Mm. I mean, I'll keep this mainly football related because, as is the case with me, and also football is my main sport. But I do want to ask you what it was like to commentate on the boxing fight between Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson, when Mike Tyson did the particular infamous ear incident.
Yeah, you're talking about the bite of the century fight, where where of course
Luis Suarez
bit
later
off a bit of Evander Holyfield's ear, famously, and that was the night I remember. The only time I ever, people will know about the electric-haired American promoter Don King, who ruled the roost in American boxing. That's the only time I've ever heard him on TV. The interviewer saying, "Don, shut up! I'm talking to Mike here." He tried to interrupt the interview to explain what Tyson had done. There was no defense for what Tyson had done.
No, absolute madness. I mean, I'd say it's such a privilege to be there commentating on it, Ian, but also I'd be quite disturbed by everything going on at the time. It's certainly
shameful, really. It was a big story, but it was shameful and kind of sad as well that it slipped to that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Well, there was a follow-up question actually about the boxing in terms of when ITV acquired most of the rights and you got pushed back into the football more so. I was going to say, were you disappointed to lose out on the boxing? But as we sort of alluded to, probably not. It was obviously good to be back on the, football front lines, I guess, for Sky again.
Well, what actually happened there was it wasn't so much that other channels moved in, but I think the management at Sky Sports at the time, I was still doing, even in the times when I wasn't so much prominent on the Premier League, I was still doing some Champions League games for Sky, and they took a decision, and I was very pleased about it. They brought me in and said, "We want you back on the We want you back on the football. We want you part of our football team." So I was back doing the football and the boxing again.
No, I imagine you liked that a lot. Actually,
That's how it happened.
Yeah,
that's how it happened. Yeah, Johnny.
I was just going to say as well, with regards to the football, obviously Sky's changed a lot, I think, in the past, 15 years, because at the time, I think the 90s and the I think it's the noughties, that is what they call it, I think. Those 2 decades in particular were dominated really by, I think, Richard Keys, Andy Gray, Jamie Redknapp came in, and obviously the commentators. And obviously there was an incident which changed their coverage quite drastically. I won't ask you about that because I think, I think that's unfair to do so. But when Andy Gray in particular, I feel like, even when we take away the sort of controversies of what happened at the time, obviously, he was an outstanding commentator, wasn't he? A co-commentator who certainly, there were many occasions where you thought, he was kind of one of the guys, the big guys. If he was on the game, it gave it a sense of gravitas, didn't it? Well, that's what much of the audience felt. I mean, you've done commentaries with Andy Gray. Did you feel like when you were there with him, I don't know, his kind of voice, his kind of demeanor on the commentary mic, did that elevate a match for you like it did for many people at home watching?
Yeah, I think Andy was the authority. His views were expert, and generally speaking, even before a replay had come up, he would have called the incident quite correctly. It was uncanny, and sometimes sitting alongside him, I thought, well, how did he see that? But he saw it because, I've always said about co-commentators who sit alongside you, I can watch 1,000 football matches and call 1,000 games, but you can never see everything that somebody who played the game at the highest level is watching when they watch a game. Andy, I think, was brilliant at getting that across. He was almost educating the viewers as he went along. And I don't think that anyone's really ever done that job of being the analyst or co-commentator any better than him. No,
I mean, he was so good even that he was almost like, we talk about main commentators yourself, Martin Tyler, John Champion, with the goal calls that they come in. You can associate certain voices and words with a goal. And not really the co-commentators, but Andy Gray had that sort of gravitas. Gerrard against Olympiacos. Oh, yeah, beauty. Apologies to Andy for that impression, but he just had it, didn't he? But he just had, didn't he? As we say, as the analytical eye, but also the voice almost of a main commentator in many ways. The way he could express himself.
Yeah, he did. And there's an interesting point with that, because I think that was like an exception that proved a rule. Generally speaking, all of us who are like, as you were, the main lead commentator, would be very annoyed if the co-commentator talked across your goal call. But on that occasion, you're quite right, Johnny. It sounded fantastic because Andy, it was just an impulsive outburst from him, which mixed with Martin's voice sounded wonderful as an effect. So it's not something you would do, and Andy would know he shouldn't be talking across Martin, but it was in its way brilliant.
In a way, it just sums up football, doesn't it? You've got rules and regulations on commentary, but sometimes pure emotion just takes over, and you can't help yourself.
As it should. We should never lose that. You never want the commentary to sound too dispassionate.
No, absolutely not. Anyway, so we've talked about your time at Sky there. Then not too long, straight after that almost, you go on to ESPN. American broadcaster. They bring in you, and I think Steve McManaman was alongside you for many of those games. And these questions were prepared, Ian, because I know you shared a bit of a bromance, actually, because I watched, very cute, actually. I watched the video on YouTube of the outtakes. The outtakes.
Yeah, that's had a few hits. That's done well.
I mean, it's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, during your time with ESPN and during your time with Steve on the commentary, how much did you enjoy that? Because it certainly looked like you did from those outtakes, and it seemed like there was a real family atmosphere at ESPN that you'd walked into. You were the main commentator, of course, as well. I think with the broadcaster.
Well, it was a low budget show that we were doing for ESPN. It was going out at breakfast time on the East Coast of America, usually the lunchtime game. And because it was a bit of a seat of the pants operation, and it was just the way we had to do it in terms of the access we had. There wasn't too much of a script, really. We had a general idea of things we might talk about. But sometimes there's a lesson there. You can almost overproduce programs sometimes. I think the success of it was that we were making it up as we went along. The conversation flowed. There were a lot of laughs in there before the game as well, at half time. So we kind of did it a little bit more for the American audience, because I think that's how they wanted it done. But we did the games. Once the game had started, we covered it like we would cover a game for England. But I think there were a few more laughs, and Steve McManaman was always up for a bit of a laugh as well. He never, by the way, ever wanted to be a co-commentator. He just wanted to come in with some comments at half time. And I said to him, you might as well do it. Look, Steve, you might as well give it a go, because all you're really doing is just talking and articulating as an ex-player about the game that's going on in front of you. So he did give it a go, and it's worked out.
Oh, it absolutely worked out. I mean, even looking at the comments on that video and on social media around the time when it said that you were leaving ESPN, there were so many Americans that were devastated. They loved yourself, they loved Steve as a partnership. Of course, I think the rights went to NBC then, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. NBC,
and they've done a very good job as well with the American coverage. But did you feel a sense of loving from the American audience? Maybe some of whom maybe weren't quite as into football before you guys came in and NBC did it, because America's love for football has really been a late bloomer, hasn't it?
Yeah, I first started working for ESPN. Well, I did the 1994 World Cup for them, but that was kind of like a one-off. But I did the 2010 World Cup and covered the USA's matches. And I covered that game where Landon Donovan scores the goal, which turns them from going out of the World Cup to topping the group and going through. And I think that was a big breakthrough in America for soccer, as they call it over there. I think a lot of people got it at that moment. Wow. This is amazing. It became the lead story right throughout the country. The leading sports story was that goal and how the USA had progressed at the World Cup. And yeah, I think compared to, say, 1994, when people honestly didn't know that much about it or care that much about it, it's now pretty big business in the USA. Look at the size of the deal NBC have signed to cover the Premier League. And they do it kind of wall to wall and do a great job covering it with Arlo White as the main commentator. It's grown a lot. It's still got some growing to do, but it's become a major factor now. And if World Cup rights come up for the bidding next time they do, the figure will be very, very high to win the rights for the United States.
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on there. And you mentioned the World Cup, actually. You did cover for ESPN, I think, some games of the 2014 World Cup. But the thing that stood out for me, I know you actually commentated on the amazing game between Germany and Brazil. So that was a shock. I mean, another incredible thing to be covering. But just before we get on to some of your key games, Ian, and your time at BT, during the 2014 World Cup, you were on an advert for ESPN, which was you know what's coming, where you commentated on. I think it was a man going for a date with a few ladies. I mean, I've got to ask Ian, have you thought about being the voice for Love Island? And
I'd like the gig. That would be a pretty good one, I think. Yeah, talking about upping your profile, Love Island. Yes, I don't think I'd ever live it down at BT Sport or ESPN for doing it. But that was great fun doing that. It was the idea of some clever guy in ESPN's marketing department in America, and I thought, what is this about? Is this going to promote the World Cup? But people really seemed to like it. When I got there, I was amazed because there was a proper Hollywood director directing it who loved the game and had heard my commentary. So he was great to work with. There were all these people who'd done auditions to be part of it, but the two were on the blind date together. And we were there all day filming it. But I think what came out was I liked it anyway.
Oh, I thought it was hilarious. So funny. And fair play to you, Ian, for doing it. I mean, it's very, very much symptomatic, actually, of maybe the way you described ESPN's fun camaraderie kind of approach to doing football, I guess.
Well, yeah, but they cover the game very seriously as well.
Of course,
so
I know.
The coverage in 2010 and 2014 was second by second, and I know I got a call from Danny Higginbottom, actually, whose wife I think is American. He was in America watching it, and he said, and it's the best compliment really you could think of from somebody who knows as much about the game as Danny. He said he thought the coverage on ESPN was superior to anything in Britain. So yeah, I mean, yeah, but I do think this, and I do believe generally as a broadcaster, if there's a chance to lighten the mood a little, absolutely. We should do that. In the end, it is entertainment, and you do have to be. And Brian Moore, the great Brian Moore, always said this, and I think his great advice, I think, for any broadcaster: be a good guest in somebody's living room.
No, absolutely, and as you say, humour often is a fantastic way to liven up a broadcast, and I completely agree with that. And I'm glad you took that on board, because it was a brilliant advert. It made me laugh anyway when I mean, I've seen it before, but it was nice to look back. I think it just seems incredible. It's like I often think it's like when you find out one of your school teachers supports a football team, you think you have a life outside of it's it's fantastic. But on top of going back to Steve McManaman, of course, because we touched on it a bit before. So you consider him a really good friend now, then, because those 3 years that you spent together, you clearly got on really well. You talked about him highly at the start of this podcast. You obviously have a really good relationship with him, based on that time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're bosom buddies or anything like that, but we text each other from time to time, and I think our sense of humour is fairly similar. And I think Steve's a bit like he was as a player. He kind of plays things a little bit off the cuff, or looks as if he's doing that anyway. He has a way of projecting that. But I tell you what, he watches and knows a lot about a lot of sports. Nearly all the big sports in America, he could give you a conversation about. He speaks fluent Spanish. I once saw him do a piece from his days at Real Madrid to camera for ESPN Deportes, that's their Spanish arm. in perfect Spanish, and he gets phone calls from Zinedine Zidane, as you would say. But we have a lot of we get practical jokes going on as well. So yeah, Steve's good fun to work with, but a lot of the other guys are too, to be fair.
Yeah, I imagine so. And he seems like, whenever I saw him on, I think he was on Premier League Tonight, Fletch and Sav, of course, his time on commentary, you always get the sense that he's quite an easygoing, but also very knowledgeable kind of guy as well. With that in mind, then, when you agreed to join BT Sport after ESPN lost the rights, there's various commentator forums out there that thought at the time that it would be a reuniting with you and Steve McManaman doing the games as a successful commentary duo, but that didn't happen, and Steve was back in the role of the studio pundit for a while. I know he's the commentator now, co-commentator, but to begin with, I spent quite a lot of time in the studio. Were you a little surprised maybe that BT decided not to go with you two as the partnership to begin with?
A little disappointed, to be honest. Yeah, but I think the view was we had a guy called Grant Best who was in charge of BT Sport when it started. He isn't with the company these days, but I think he didn't feel it was quite right for whatever reason. And as I told you, everything's subjective in our business. So people want to make their own mark. When they get the rights, they always want to do it something a little bit differently than people have done it before, and say, well, this is our product. This is the way we're going to do it. These are our people. So these things happen. It's just the way the cookie crumbles in TV.
No, absolutely. Obviously, the person who you did do a lot of commentaries with to begin with on BT was Michael Owen. He was fresh to the punditry business, and I was a BT Sport customer as well, so I watched all the games that I could. And to be honest with you, I actually thought Michael was okay at the job. I thought he tried. I mean, I think he got better as he went on. I thought he offered insight when he could. He offered a fairly sound reading of the game from the co-commentary perspective. And yet, if you read social media whilst Michael was doing commentaries, you'd think he was probably the most hated man in Britain. I mean, do you feel sorry for some of the stick that your co-commentators have received whilst they're broadcasting?
Well, I feel sorry for the stick we all receive, because that is something I think that the likes of John Motson and Barry Davis, if you want to go back in time, never had to contend with. That social media, if you read it and let it take, if it goes to the heart, and it does sometimes, we've all got feelings, it can destroy your confidence. So my general approach to it, and I'm sure Michael Owen's general approach and everybody else as well, is don't read those notifications, because there's an awful lot of trolls out there who just want to hurl abuse and insults at you. I'm with you. I thought Michael was good, but I think some of the criticism he received on social media wasn't to do with the standard of the commentary. It's the way Michael seems to divide opinion generally, quite wrongly. If people knew him, let me tell you a Michael Owen story. My wife runs a charity for multiple sclerosis, and I asked Michael if he'd come down and appear at a big function. So he rang me and said, I don't think I can. He agreed to do it. Then he said, he rang me again and said, I don't think I can because I've got a Liverpool Legends game I'm contracted to play in. Then he rang me again 3 weeks later. I didn't get anyone to replace him. And he said, you haven't got anybody else, have you, for that charity you're running? I said, well, no. Why? Can you do it then? He said, yeah, I can do it now. He drove down that evening, appeared, was charm itself to everybody, didn't get paid a penny, and drove home again and got home at 3 a.m. He drove the length of the country to do it. So that's the kind of guy Michael Owen is, and I really won't hear a word against him.
No, I mean, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I think with social media, whenever I tweet or whatever, I always look to have reasonable debate. I'm always up for that. But there seems to be an issue with hating. It seems to be fashionable to hate someone or something, and it's not nice at all. I mean, you don't have to go into too much detail, Ian, but how did Michael seem to take the criticism when he was, because obviously it's going to have some effect, maybe a little bit, because he's obviously being taken, because early on BT, I think Michael Owen did virtually every Premier League commentary, didn't he? It was every single week. So, but was he still, positive, upbeat, didn't take it too much to heart, or did it have a bit of an effect?
I don't know really, because Michael kind of keeps things much to himself, and I think he's very, very tough. I remember he told me once, he said, well, nothing's ever going to frighten me much because my dad made me box when I was 13 years of age, and I was scared. Did I worry about being kicked by defenders? No. What was the game I liked playing in the best? Going out at Goodison with the whole crowd against you. That really got my juices flowing. So I don't think anything like that probably had the slightest effect on him, to be honest with you. And I think now, if you speak to Michael now, he'd say he much prefers doing the punditry in the studio than being up there on the gantry.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I hope it didn't have too much of an effect. It does really annoy me, and I'm sure it annoys you and everyone, when you see people being mindlessly abused on social media. It's such a good platform if used properly, but sometimes people take advantage of that platform. Take you forward a few seasons now, and when Glenn Hoddle joined BT, BT as the network decided to they made 3-man commentary teams a regular feature. So I think Man United, Tottenham, 15-16 season, I think it was Darren Fletcher, Michael Owen, Glenn Hoddle. And then I think every Premier League game for that season and many of the other games featured 3-man commentary teams with either Glenn Hoddle, I think Trevor Francis also in that 3rd-man position. From your standpoint, Ian, do you think the 3-man commentary team did something more beneficial or any better than a 2-man standard commentary team would?
Didn't like the idea, if I'm perfectly honest with you, and maybe didn't make myself too popular in opposing it as well, because I thought it placed us in quite a difficult position, because we were not only having to call the game, we were almost like the conductor of the orchestra as well, standing between 2 pundits either side. There really isn't room, and of course you lose the rapport that you can get if it's just the 2 of you bouncing off each other. So I wasn't sure it brought enough extra to it. But I tell you one idea that BT Sport have come up with, and it's the best idea I think anybody's come up with in a long, long time, and that is using a referee as part of the commentary to give you the definitive guide on a decision. And I'm surprised, I'll be blunt with you, I'm surprised Sky Sports haven't followed that, because I think their coverage lacks that.
Yeah, I think Sky Sports did have Howard Webb on, didn't they, initially? I think it was a Monday Night Football, and then he came in to do a feature. But BT then, as you say, made it a regular thing on the commentary to have another person on board. And yeah, I agree with you. I think often when it comes to a decision where the player's going to have a certain viewpoint that might be out of passion or maybe out of touch, maybe with the small intricacies of refereeing, a referee could look at that with his glasses and say, actually, if you go to the 355th page of the refereeing document, clearly, so obviously that,
this is the law. This is what the law says, and that you've got the definitive view from the guy who refereed the World Cup final. So
no, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, currently, Ian, you've done a bit of work on the World Feed recently. You've done work for BT still. What does the future for commentary hold for you, Ian? I mean, obviously it's changed. Obviously, you've had such an extensive career, and obviously right now you're talking to me, and I'm sure you'd rather be preparing for a Saturday match, no doubt. But I also saw you last month appear on ESPN, having a chat to Stevie Nicol about the offside rule and whether or not.
I do that program, ESPN FC, which they broadcast every day on ESPN News and goes around the world. Good little show, by the way, with a lot of hot topics debated. What does the future hold? That would depend on my bosses, really, at ESPN or anywhere else. So if you get offered another contract, you get offered another contract. So it's the fine line. We're all, doesn't matter what you've done. No. It's somebody's going to make a decision. There are other commentators coming through. It's not always totally secure.
No. Well, I'd be offering you another contract, Ian. I think you're a fantastic commentator.
You can come to my contract negotiations next time.
Yeah, put me on co-commentary and I'll boost my portfolio. But no, looking back at this time now, we've sped through that a lot of years there, and some really interesting insight on from all that. If I said to you 3 games that you've commentated on that you thought the best 3 that stick out for you, what would they be and why?
Memorable football matches.
Yeah.
I was also commentating for the American audience when Sergio Aguero won the title.
I know you were.
The game. So that one, you mentioned the World Cup semi-final. Astounding result, unbelievable result. Brazil won, Germany 7. I remember putting the microphone down alongside Steve McManaman, saying after that, people will be still talking about that game in 50 years. So that one as well. And then I'd have to say the other one is that game I did when the USA rescued themselves at the World Cup, because that was a bit of a career-changing moment for me. So, I'd pick those three.
Those three. No, very interesting. Okay. One game that you didn't commentate on that you wish you could have?
One game I didn't commentate on that I wished I could have. It's one of those you need advance notice of a little bit, that.
No, I know. I do it on purpose.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. Let me think. Oh, let's say the 1966 World Cup final.
I knew. Yeah. No, I'm sure.
Thoughts?
What about, I'm not sure if you did, but did you commentate on the Portsmouth FA Cup win?
No, I was a fan that day. I've followed Pompey all my life. I was born in Portsmouth. So I wouldn't have wanted to commentate on that. I wanted to be there as a fan, because that was like a lifelong ambition of mine to see Portsmouth win the FA Cup, and they did.
No, I imagine that was an amazing feeling. And if you were on commentary, just hypothetically, could you have stayed neutral?
Yes, absolutely. I've covered many Portsmouth games. In fact, I covered one pretty recently in the FA Cup just before this horrible break that we're on, when Arsenal won at Fran Park. And you, if anything, you almost overcorrect. So I've never found it that difficult. And I said to them, they said, "Are you happy to commentate?" And I said, "Yeah, because it's going to save another commentator doing all the research on Portsmouth, because it's all in my head."
Absolutely. I mean, I was aware that you had commentated on the Portsmouth in particular. I was just sort of suggesting that on a game of such scale, an unprecedented level. I mean, but obviously you're such a professional, Ian. I would imagine, of course, no game would be too. You'd always be very thorough and neutral. Good question.
I'd like to think so anyway.
Good question. Actually, I've just thought of right now before I move on to the team of the season selections. Would be. Have you ever gone to a game where you think, "Oh, I don't want to do the normal level of research that I do"? Because I know yourselves, and I remember Derek Ray put a picture on social media of when he'd gone to a game. I think it was in the Bundesliga, and the amount of research per player, the writing was size 5 font. It was ridiculous, and he had so much per player. And I imagine that's the case.
Only Derek could understand it. I've seen this though. Just like in all of our notes, nobody can understand it except the guy who's doing it. Only one person has to.
For sure. But the thoroughness in the detail in those notes, I'm sure is the same across the board. But has there ever been a game where you think, "Oh, I can't be bothered today. I'm just gonna wing it, see what happens," or would you say to yourself, "No, I mean, I love my job. I love doing what I do. I'm always going to do the same thing every week"?
Generally speaking, what you've just said is the way you'd go about it, because you want to go there armed with as much info as you can possibly have. But I tell you a mistake people can sometimes fall into, and that is, look, I've done all this homework and you're going to hear it all. I think always let the game dictate to you. You hope you don't use a tenth of that stuff, because if you use much more than that, it's probably been quite a dull game. So you can over-prepare a match, and I've heard commentaries in the past where I thought whoever's doing this game's probably just had a bit too much time on their hands to get ready for it, because some of these lines were a bit on the esoteric side. But I don't want to criticize anybody, because we've all done commentaries where we thought we could have done better.
No, I'm sure. But that was a very good answer. Now, we'll move away from the commentary side of things. We'll move into the football side of things. And while there's not too much football going on at the moment, we have had roughly 3/4 of a season, and I noticed Jamie Carragher and a few of the other people at Sky Sports rolling out their team of the season. So I thought, well, I'll ask Ian what his main 11 would be. You sent me it on Twitter. I've also done mine, which is the same apart from 2 players. I mean, we'll start in goal because that's both the same for us, actually. Dean Henderson. Why Dean Henderson over Alisson and Nick Pope?
Well, it's the team of the season. It's not maybe who's the best goalkeeper. Probably the best goalkeeper is Alisson or Edison. But this season, I think Henderson's been outstanding and a big part of the Sheffield United story. And I think he's going to be in England contention as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing that stands that's been impressive about Henderson, I think, is the confidence that he has for such a young player. I mean, I think he made a mistake against Liverpool, and even his manager Chris Wilder was quite, he didn't sugarcoat it. He said, "Look, he's made a mistake," and he was quite open about that, surprisingly to myself and to many watching. But he got straight back up, carried on, putting in really solid performances, good with his feet, good with his shot stopping capabilities. I completely agree with you, Ian. I think he's done really, really good this season. So he's also in my team of the season. Moving into the defence, I think three of the four picked themselves: Alexander-Arnold, Robertson, Van Dijk, smashing. Just easy to pick from. But the fourth option, I'd go for Johnny Evans, and you'd go for you've gone for Harry Maguire.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue too much about Johnny Evans. He's been made quite a difference, I think, at Leicester, and the guy alongside him, Soyuncu, as well. But I've gone for Harry Maguire because Manchester United had the worst defence in the top 9 last season, and I think a big reason why they have a much, much better defensive record this year is Maguire. I think he's the captain now. He's been a leader, and I think he's been a settling influence even when things weren't going so well for Manchester United, and they were going a lot better for them just before the break for the virus. So I put him in there alongside Van Dijk.
I think it's a really good point.
And then Alexander-Arnold, of course, and Robertson, I think we've all had, and Van Dijk would be the rest of the back four.
I mean, just on a slightly separate topic, with Alexander-Arnold, incredible performances we've been putting in this season for England. England have, at the moment, 5 players who could get into most nations at right back: Alexander-Arnold, Wan-Bissaka, Reece James, Kyle Walker, Kieran Trippier. I mean, that is a plethora of talent in one position, isn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah, really good selection there at right back, and it might be in certain games when you've got to the European Championships, which now of course are next year, where you might say maybe we won't have Alexander-Arnold because this is a game we're going to have to do a lot of defending. Well, maybe Wan-Bissaka, because not much gets past him. So that's an interesting choice somewhere down the road. I mean, Alexander-Arnold, though, 12 assists in the Premier League. Only De Bruyne is better than that. So for a right back, it shows you about the quality of his delivery. Brilliant going forward. He might be able to improve a bit defensively. So
you almost
he's in.
You almost look at it with Wan-Bissaka and Alexander-Arnold. If Alexander-Arnold's a 9 out of 10 going forward, he's a 6 out of 10 defensively. Wan-Bissaka might be a 6 out of 10 defensively, and a 6 out of 10 going forward, and a 9 out of 10 defensively. It's like yin and yang, isn't it? Almost.
Maybe 5 out of 10 going forward for Wan-Bissaka at the moment. Ooh. That's an area of his game he has to improve. But he sticks out those legs and gets tackles in. And it's just like the Crystal Palace fans used to chant, "Your wingers won't like him."
No, they certainly don't. He's a phenomenal player, and I think he'll do really well for Manchester United. Anyway, into the midfield, both gone for the same 3: Henderson, De Bruyne, and Jack Grealish. I actually had Mateo Kovacic as an outside maybe option for that because he's been excellent for Chelsea, hasn't he? The unsung hero in many ways of their campaign.
Yeah, Kovacic has been good, particularly in the earlier part of the campaign. But he'd be an unlucky loser, I think, in terms of you can't pick everybody. You could argue that Grealish has blotted his copybook with his playing bumper cars after going to a party when he should have been staying at home. But I've decided this personally for our little game and chat just on football grounds. Grealish has done a really good job in a struggling team at Aston Villa, and I look forward to seeing what he'd be like with better players around him.
Oh yeah, I completely agree on the Grealish point. You know, and I'm sure he'll do wonders. I mean, Paul Gascoigne wasn't always the same, was he? But on the football field, he was an absolute. You know, he was a legend for club and country. I'm not sure Grealish is quite in that circle
Not
yet,
yet. No, not quite. No,
but
Gazza was special.
he's certainly loved to be, I suppose, half the player that Paul Gascoigne was, because as we say, phenomenal talent. Got the ability, as we say. But I tell you, someone who you just every single season, well, this season in particular, when he's not injured, I don't think there's a rival to Kevin De Bruyne, is there, in terms of a midfielder that's just got absolutely everything.
I think he's the best football. He's the best footballer in the Premier League.
Absolutely, it's just incredible. I mean, he's passing on both feet, ability to finish, works hard. Absolute dream. I mean, I think Paul Pogba actually is a very good player, and you know, when he's on top form, you think, you know, he's got the lot from midfielder. But then you look at Kevin De Bruyne, and you just think he's a level above even him. It's just remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Pogba's got a lot to prove, really, whenever he returns from his injury, to be honest. Because, to be honest with you, has he really done it for Manchester United? No, not yet.
No. The best performances of Pogba were in the 2018 World Cup, weren't they? I mean,
Absolutely,
for France,
yeah.
where he was absolutely remarkable. But I agree with you. There's certainly a lot to prove. And whether United get rid or they don't, I guess it's up to them. In terms of, we'll go to Henderson, actually, because saw Guy Mowbray was getting into an argument with a fan about suggesting Jordan Henderson for Player of the Year. The fan was saying, you know, you're only saying that because he's English, but that's simply not true, is it? He's been phenomenal. It's a ridiculous argument.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument to who will get the Footballer of the Year. And of course, we haven't finished the season yet. Let's hope we are able to finish the season and we'll have a bit more evidence. But yeah, is Henderson the best footballer? No. Other players are better footballers than him, but he is the leader. I think he's the guy that pulls them up by the collars of their shirts if they're thinking even of slipping. He is Klopp's number one representative out on the pitch. So you're looking at a team here who've dropped only 5 points all season, and Jordan Henderson's a pretty big reason. And I think even his teammates would say he might be the biggest reason why they are where they are. So I'm with Guy Mowbray.
I agree with both of you. I think it's been phenomenal. And as you say, I mean, he might not be the most talented footballer technically, but you know, his leadership's incredible. His work ethic's incredible. I mean, N'Golo Kante is not going to score 10, 15 goals a season, but look at what he did with his contributions in midfield off the ball. Tremendous player as well. On to the attacking trio. Again, Salah, Mane, both of us have gone for Salah and Mane, I think. Incredible numbers. I think Mane's probably outshone Salah this season, but that doesn't mean that Salah's had a bad season, of course.
He's a tremendous threat, Salah, all the time. Huge threat. Sometimes gives the ball away, but you always think when this guy gets the ball, there could be a goal here. And he's dangerous.
No.
So,
yeah, he is. I mean, Mane, though, I don't know if when you think about Mane, his strength is ridiculous. When he gets the ball and he's knocking people off who are bigger than him, he's just a ridiculous freak of nature in terms of his physicality, his trickery, his ability to. He's got a really good all-round game, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's strong, clever, great instincts, gets goals, sets up goals, superb player. And, you know, it was interesting to read the feature about him this week about, you know, the poverty that he grew up in, and, you know, he couldn't afford boots, played bare feet, wasn't appreciated by people in Senegal too much. So he's overcome a lot to be the player he is. And I think he'd be in everybody's 11 so far this season. And he might well be voted Footballer of the Year, although Jordan Henderson's got a good shout at that as well. But we differ on one, don't we? I'm going Aguero as my third striker alongside Salah and Mane.
Yeah, and I'm going Jamie Vardy because I think what Vardy's done again this season has been nothing short of remarkable. He's like you, Ian. He's like a fine wine. He just seems to be getting better with age. Just ridiculous. You know,
I think I might be vinegar compared to Jamie Vardy, but go on.
I mean, I feel like a reduced kind of Stellarian, but you know, with his output though, you know, he retired from international football to focus primarily on his club, and I think he's been at the heartbeat really of Leicester this season, as he was in the title-winning season. He offers them a focal point up front. He scores them plenty of goals. He you know, the game before we broke up because of this coronavirus, he scored 2 after a little barren run of, he'd admit, I think. But I just think, I don't know. To be honest with you, I looked at it and thought Leicester's done so well this season, and I've only got one representative. Now I have 2, and Vardy, you know, one of their star players. I just felt it was horrible not to put someone in. Go on, Ian.
Well, he's the top goal scorer in the Premier League so far this season, Vardy. So that supports your arguments. And it is a tight decision, I think. But I've gone for Aguero because on minutes per goal, he comes out as number 1. And season after season, he is he's just so good. He's such a predator and scores all kinds of different goals. Yeah, close, different type of players, of course, Aguero and Vardy. But Aguero, when I thought about it, yeah, it's hard to oppose him.
Yeah, no, Aguero again has been phenomenal. And Aubameyang as well. Aubameyang's done he's got some remarkable numbers again for Arsenal, despite the fact they've had a bad season generally. You know, but go on, an easy one for you, Ian. Manager of the season, who could that possibly be?
Chris Wilder, for me.
Oh, you got me there.
I mean, everybody's going to say Jurgen Klopp, and I've got total respect. He's fantastic, Jurgen Klopp. But what Chris Wilder has done with Sheffield United almost defies belief. Everybody tipped that team to be relegated. They're in the race for Europe, for goodness sake. It's astonishing what he's done. And basically, with the team, they got promoted as well. They didn't go out and spend a fortune. So he is the manager of the year for me.
Yeah. Sean Dyche for me, Ian. I'm not biased.
He's
done a remarkable job.
He does a remarkable job every
He does.
year.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely does a remarkable job. I
Manager.
mean, you make the Wilder point here just before we do finish. I think I agree with you actually in many ways, because I was sort of touting this and got shot down a little bit, because the easy argument is if Liverpool were to surpass the 100-point mark and get the most points ever in a Premier League season, as much as I love Chris Wilder, and I really do, and what he's done, I would struggle to give him the accolade. But I completely agree with what you said as well. So it's like, I don't know, it's apples and oranges. You just don't know which one to go with. But yeah, I mean that was. I'm glad we agreed on 9 of them, because that, you know, that would have been an interesting debate if we had 11 completely different players. But on a lasting note, Ian, away from the football, is the sort of a message that you'd sort of want to convey now, as in, you know, we're in unprecedented times. We don't know whether football's coming back, but when it does come back, and when everything does eventually come back to normal, how much sweeter will it be? How much more appreciative will we be of what we used to consider normal before?
I think we'll be very appreciative. I think it's going to be an emotional day when football returns after everything the country, the world has been through. None of us have ever experienced anything like this pandemic and what it's done. And I think everyone will have a completely different perspective. And maybe, although we'll love it and we'll still be glued to it, maybe we'll realize that it's really not quite as important as we always thought beforehand. So I just hope for everybody that, you know, they can sit tight and stay home and help. Hopefully it won't be too much longer, and we can get back to something like the world that we all used to know.
No, amazing words, Ian. I mean, I just sort of, just to finish now, I'd just say that I think you need moments of adversity in life really to appreciate the sweeter things even more. And there's probably no bigger adversity right now for many of us, you know, ever. I mean, this is unprecedented times, crazy times, things that we, you know, that have shocked us all. But if we all stay together, we all fight hard to beat this virus, to beat this pandemic, then eventually, as we say, when all returns to normal, when it all starts to sort itself out, then, you know, it will be quite an amazing day. And that was my attempt at some kind of Oscar Wilde poetry. but I don't think it was quite on the same level as that great writer. But no, Ian, it's been absolutely amazing. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for agreeing to do this. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I could pick your brains for hours, but I recognise you have a life too, and so do I. But I honestly, this was what an absolute pleasure. So thanks for coming in. Thanks for all of you that have been listening, and hopefully we bring more fantastic guests onto the show, and we delve into their lives a little bit. Treat it like a pound shop Piers Morgan's life stories, and we'll see you next week. Okay.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye. Nice one. Okay.